Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin this morning with Thomas Wright, President and CEO of Summit Sotheby's Real Estate. He's here to go in depth on Utah's real estate market. Thomas, appreciate your time being here on the show.
Thanks for having me on, Glenn.
So I had you on last July. You remember that, and we were talking about current conditions, and my goodness, what a swing. It's done a 180, pretty much. So talk about how we've seen things change in such a short amount of time.
Well, yeah, I mean, we saw one of the hottest real estate markets in American history. It was off the hook. A lot of people did really well. Buyers really struggled. And then the Federal Reserve realized later in 2021 that they needed to cool things down, that it was a runaway market with really high inflation. And so earlier this year in May, they started to increase interest rates. And so we really saw the peak of the market about that April 22nd is kind of where we're calling it. And after that, they started to increase rates, and they've done a good job, if that's what they were trying to do, of slowing down the real estate market and the overall economy. And I can tell you that we have seen it change since I was here last July.
And what does that mean for, start off with buyers? What does it mean, what we've seen happen in the last year or so?
It's a little healthier market for buyers. The inventory that we have on the market right now in the state of Utah is about double what we had last year. It's still only about 3.5 months supply of inventory. That's still low. We could use more inventory on the market for sure, but buyers feel like they're in a much better position than they did last year just because it was so crazy. So it's still a good market for sellers. We still could use inventory, but buyers are finding more inventory than they found last year in the peak, and that's primarily because interest rates have cooled the market.
When you take a look at that, though, how has that impacted? It obviously does what a buyer can qualify for.
Yeah, I mean, when you have interest rates that were, below 3%, and then suddenly they're over 7%, now they've come back down a little bit into the 6s, that really limits what people can purchase, and that's what the Federal Reserve really was trying to do. That, in addition to the huge debt they have on their balance sheet, was the reason that they wanted to make that happen. So yeah, you see buyers now, they shop payment when they're borrowing money, and so higher interest rates make it less affordable. And we have an affordable housing crisis in this state already, so that's been hard to watch.
What should a seller know at this point in time?
It's still a good market. You can't price aspirationally. We used to price in 2021 a little ahead of the market because the prices were appreciating and we were trying to stay ahead of the market. Now you have to realize that there was a peak. We've come down a little bit off the high, that we're not going to have 24% appreciation like we had in 21. We're not going to have 16% appreciation like we had in 2020. But that you're going to have to be a little more reasonable with price. But anyone who thinks there's going to be a huge price correction or that there has been is mistaken. There hasn't been, and I personally don't think there will be.
And that's an interesting point. You provided me with some data from October of last year to October of this year. New listings down, pending sales down, closed sales down, but median sales price and average sales price up.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? So you look at the numbers and you see the sales volume is down about 20%. The pended contracts, meaning people that are under contract to purchase, is also down about 20%. The inventory's doubled, like we talked about, but the list to sell ratio, in other words, when somebody buys a property, what percentage of the list price are they paying is still really high. And that's because properties that are in really good condition, that are priced well in this market, are selling. There are still a lot of buyers in the market. It's still a fantastic time to sell, and the market still needs inventory.
Did you ever think we would be looking at the market we are seeing right now here in the state of Utah?
We have a couple of rules at Summit Sotheby's International Realty. One of them is don't predict the future. You just don't know in the housing market. But the one thing you do know is that it's cyclical. Real estate is cyclical. We saw a real big run up, 40% appreciation in 2 years. We all knew that that wasn't going to continue and that it would pull back and that we would have a time like this where the market would cool, things would settle. And quite honestly, Glenn, it's good for the market to be where we are and to have a little bit of equilibrium coming back.
Okay, when we talk about the prices, though, and the next generation, your kids and mine, how are they going to afford to live here? Because right now, the average sales price, and I believe this is statewide, still $582,000. Actually, that's up to $620,000 now. The median sales price, $492,000. Those are prices that you and I would have never even imagined when we were getting into our first homes.
Oh, I totally agree, and this is the heartbreaking part of it. We've got to find a solution for this. Utah is always innovative and always figures out these intractable issues. So how do we solve the problem? Well, it's a couple things. Number one, our zoning laws are 50, 60, 70 years old. They don't match where we are now. We've got to look at those from top to bottom. But really, Glenn, what we need is we need a statewide plan. And we need it in rural Utah, but we also need it along the Wasatch Front. You remember the days when you could drive from Payson to Layton and you were driving through different communities, and you go through, you know, Orem and Lehigh, and then you get to Draper and Sandy. Now it's one big continuous metropolitan area. And we are allowing the housing decisions to be made at the local level, which is great, except for we're all in a big macro economy and metropolitan area. So we need to have a metropolitan Wasatch Front plan for housing that includes affordable housing, that requires us to look at the zoning, impact costs, and we need to be more innovative with the materials we use, how we build homes. There's got to be a lot of innovation, and that's on the horizon. It's happening.
Talk a little more about the zoning, though. What are you talking about? Are you talking about going for more density?
Whenever you use the word density, people automatically think we're talking about apartment buildings or high rises in their backyard. We're not talking about that. We're talking about detached single-family homes on their own lot with their yard, but maybe instead of 4 per acre, maybe we're doing 5 per acre or 6 per acre or a couple more per acre. That dramatically brings down the cost of housing. But when you can't do that because the master plan or the zoning is so old and antiquated, then what happens is you create this urban sprawl. And the only place you can do it is further out. And the more we develop and go out, we know what happens in metropolitan areas. We already have air quality problems. We already have transportation congestion. We already know we have to build more schools and more roads when we do that. There's a better way to do it, but we need a master plan for housing along the Wasatch Front and in rural Utah.
Well, and we also know in a valley, there's only so much room you can build geographically anyway.
And we're running out of it. And that's part of it. So the cities have done a great job, but we all need to chip in and we need to say, let's look at it, let's look at it in a holistic way, and let's try to all of us do our best job to not have the NIMBYism. You know, everybody wants more affordable housing, but they don't want it in their backyard. And we've got to figure out a way where we can put it in all of our communities so that our kids and grandkids can live the Utah lifestyle and they can afford to stay here. That's so important to us and our values.
Yeah, for sure. Can that be done?
It can be done. There's no question about it. There's a lot of good people working on this. I want to applaud legislative leadership who are working really tirelessly on this issue. The cities and towns in Utah are looking at it. But at the end of the day, we're going to have to make some hard decisions. The low-hanging fruit, the easy fruit to pick on housing has been picked. ADUs, we saw that bill and other bills go through the legislature. The hard stuff is now here, and we're going to have hard conversations. And the citizens of this state really are going to need to be a part of it and step up and support policy that allows a little bit more density and different kinds of housing in innovative ways. And if we do that, yes, we can absolutely solve this problem.
You already talked about the housing prices here in the state, and you don't think that's going to change?
I don't see housing. The prices, you know, like I said, 16% appreciation in 20, 24% appreciation in 21.
I mean, those are just
those are gone. And you've seen a little, you know, pull back to normal, but there's not going to be a big correction, primarily because the cost to replace housing is so much more expensive, right? With inflation, the materials are kind of permanently higher. Some have fluctuated like lumber, but by and large, most materials are just more expensive. And then labor is more expensive. The labor shortage caused a run on salaries and wages that isn't going to come back. That's probably a positive, but that makes everything more expensive. So the replacement cost looks really good when you're looking to buy a home versus whether or not you want to build or not.
Yeah. You already said it's your strategy not to try to say what's going to happen in a year, but just indulge us, if you will, here. Where do you see the market going in the next year?
Well, I believe the Federal Reserve will continue to do what they say they're going to do, and that is raise rates. And maybe they'll change course, but I take them at their word. So far, they've done what they said they were going to do. And those increases in interest rates are going to cause unemployment, not just in the housing sector where contractors and subcontractors are going to have a lot less work than they had in years past. So there will be higher unemployment. I think we're headed into this recession and this correction. I think it will be a good part of 23, and hopefully we can get equilibrium back in a lot of different areas of our economics, and then we can start to recover and start to grow again.
It's kind of unbelievable, the difference in the 1 year from the last time you were on here talking about this.
Isn't it unbelievable? Yeah. And it's a lesson too, right? I mean, there's a lot of factors in play, but it's a real lesson that when the government intervenes and does massive bailouts and massive stimulus packages and they spend that kind of money and they incur that kind of debt, $9 trillion on the Fed's balance sheet. Last year, our federal government incurred over $1 trillion deficit of spending versus what they took in. These things have consequences. We've got to get the national debt under control and our spending under control in this country, or we're going to have these big fluctuations.
All right. Interesting stuff. Really appreciate your insights. Thanks so much for being here.